It was supposed to be just another ordinary day at that modern company, full of young people in a hurry and their cell phones buzzing every minute. But for some reason, on that rainy afternoon, a man in a worn-out suit stopped in front of the fauteuil reception and made everyone's eyes turn, even if only for a few seconds. He didn't seem lost. He knew exactly where he was and why he was there. What would make a man almost 70 years old, walking slowly, ask for a job as a doorman in a place where no one seems to be over 30? And why, even though he was treated with disdain, didn't he get irritated or look away? The answer is simple. He wasn't there out of necessity. He was there by choice. And also, perhaps, out of justice. He knew he wasn't just anyone, but he was willing to let the world treat him that way. Just for a while, Carlos Montenegro handed over his resume with steady hands and a calm voice. The girl at the counter didn't pay much attention, as if she already knew the end of the story by heart. He was just another old man wanting to work, to pass the time. He sat nearby, waiting, with no visible expectation on his face. But there was something unusual about his every move, as if that silence was hiding something big. No one noticed that folded inside the envelope, there was a letterhead with a name that, until a few years ago, was mentioned in meeting rooms all over the country. In the next room, the reception manager laughed disdainfully when he saw his gauge on the paper. Another one who thinks that friendliness is enough. Here we need agility. Little did he know that the man sitting outside had already led operations much more complex than anyone there could imagine, and that he had come back there for a very specific reason. But the truth doesn't take long to come out. And when it does, it changes everything. But that afternoon, no one imagined what was about to happen. Not even him. Asterisk, as Carlos sat waiting at the reception desk, time seemed to pass at a different speed. His eyes took in everything, from the young interns stumbling over their own steps to the distracted security guards looking at their cell phones. He saw everything with a calmness that didn't match someone who supposedly desperately needed a job. In the corner of the receptionist's desk, his resume sat there, untouched for almost 20 minutes. There were already more papers piled on top of it, as if it were just another piece of paper. When the woman decided to take it to the next room, she accidentally dropped the envelope on the floor. An intern who was passing by in a hurry bent down to help. He picked up the envelope, but before handing it back, he noticed a small, discreet gold seal in the bottom right corner of the last page. It was different from anything he had ever seen on a regular resume. A coat of arms. Official. Curious, the young man quickly flipped through the pages until he stopped at a signature. He swallowed hard. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Carlos Montenegro. He knew that name, or had heard it somewhere. He turned back 2 pages and read the beginning of the document more carefully. Former National Director of Operations, Nornet Group, 1991 to 2008. He knew what Nornet was. His father worked there and always talked about a Montenegro. A respected man, one of the great names behind the reconstruction of national logistics in the 1990s. The intern didn't think twice. He ran with the envelope in his hands to the manager's office. When he entered, almost out of breath, the manager looked up in boredom. Another resume? Leave it there. But the young man insisted. I think you should see this in person. Still reluctant, the manager pulled the paper out. And there, at that moment, the tone changed. The manager got up from his chair slowly. He walked to the shelf in the corner and pulled out an old leather-bound book. Inside was a set of old reports that he used as reference, a tradition of his. He opened it to the page marked with a metal clip. And there it was, a black and white photo of a man in a suit shaking hands with a minister. The name in the caption left no doubt. It was the same man, back at the reception, Carlos looked at his wristwatch with a slight smile on his face, as if he already knew that time was going to turn in his favor. The manager appeared a few minutes later, accompanied by 2 directors. One of them, the youngest, seemed completely confused. The other, already with gray hair, stopped in his tracks when he saw Carlos. He stood still. After a few seconds, he took off his glasses. "My God, Mr. Montenegro?" Carlos stood up elegantly. "It's been a while since you called me that." The 2 hugged like old acquaintances, and silence took over the reception. The girl at the counter, now standing, watched without knowing what to do. The other employees looked at each other, not understanding what was happening. A security guard, who a few minutes ago had ignored the old man, now maintained a straight, respectful posture, as if he were in front of someone far above the common hierarchy of that building. The conversation between the directors and Carlos was taken to a private room. The mood was different. The questions were now accompanied by admiration. They wanted to know where he had been, why he had disappeared from public office, what had led him to ask for such a simple position. Carlos answered honestly, but without giving many details. He only said that, after losing his wife and seeing his children build their lives far away, he felt like getting back to his routine. "I wanted to observe people again, feel the movement, know that I can still contribute in some way, even if it's just opening and closing a door." That shook the men in the room. The youngest director was still in disbelief. He asked why he hadn't sought higher positions. Carlos shrugged. "I've had big positions, but now I only want big moments. Sometimes a sincere good morning is worth more than a room on the top floor." Meanwhile, outside, the reception was still digesting what was happening. The rumor was spreading. The old man was, in fact, a living legend who was there of his own free will. The manager returned to the main room with a completely different attitude. He called everyone together and asked for respect. He said that this man was someone who, without them knowing it, helped create part of the structure that supported the very company where they all worked. Carlos left the room and looked at the counter. He smiled at the girl at the reception. She, still embarrassed, tried to smile back. He simply said, "I know it's hard to see real people, but it's worth trying." The clock read 5:47 p.m. The day was far from over, but for many people there, something had already changed forever. The next morning, the building looked different. The previous day's hubbub had not died down. In fact, it had spread. The receptionist, now visibly disconcerted, was checking resumes more carefully. The security guard, who had barely glanced at Carlos before, now got up from his chair every time he passed. Even the coffee served at the reception desk for candidates had become stronger and hotter. Carlos arrived at 7:45 a.m., punctual as always. He was wearing the same suit jacket as the day before. He didn't seem to care about impressing anyone, but he still made an impression. The gray-haired director, who recognized him, was waiting for him at the elevator door. "Come up with me. We want to talk a little more." On the 11th floor, the conference room was full. The glass table gleamed in the morning light. Some of the company's most important directors were there, and they all stood up when Carlos entered, not out of politeness but out of genuine respect. He calmly thanked them and sat down. One of the men opened a folder, showing slides with statistics, goals, and current difficulties of the company. "You must know that we are not exactly in our best moment." Carlos just watched. After a few minutes, he picked up a pen and started taking notes on a pad of paper. When the director finished, he asked to see the most recent numbers of the pizza after operation. They apologized because they did not have everyone there. "Bring them now," said the owner of the company, who had just entered the room silently and interrupted everything. a tall, well-dressed man with a firm expression. He walked slowly towards Carlos and looked him in the eyes, his mouth half open, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. "Mr. Montenegro, I was an intern at Nornet in the 90s. You do not remember me, but I remember you very well." The room fell silent. The man bowed his head respectfully and when he stood up, extended his hand. "It is an honor to have you here." Carlos shook his hand firmly. "You have grown." "Congratulations." The conversation continued. For more than 2 hours, Carlos commented on operational flaws, suggested adjustments, and raised points that no one else there had noticed. Not with that surgical eye. The most impressive thing was not his technical knowledge. It was the way he analyzed people. He noticed attitudes, insecurities, potential. He didn't speak out of vanity. He spoke as if he still wanted to help. In the end, the owner of the company called him in for a private conversation. He offered him a position as a senior consultant with his own office, support team, and generous salary. Carlos listened to everything in silence. Then he smiled, without sarcasm. "I don't want to go back to the top. I was there for too long. I just want to see real people again. The movement of the streets, the good morning of those who pass by in a hurry, the sound of the door opening, the respect for the beginning of each day." The owner was speechless. He tried to insist, but Carlos was clear. "Life has already given me more than I asked for. Today, I just want to give back a little." That afternoon, the company did something unprecedented. It published an internal note to all employees, officially announcing that Carlos Montenegro, former National Operations Director, would join the team as an honorary doorman with full rights but a more symbolic role, to remind everyone every day that great stories don't always wear new suits. Sometimes they wear humility. The next day, he was there, standing next to the main door, smiling at everyone who passed by, calling out the names of those he could remember. The receptionist now greeted him kindly. The security guard chatted with him during breaks. And the new candidates who entered the building saw him as just another employee until, little by little, they understood that there, standing at the entrance, was someone who had seen the world from above and chosen, of his own free will, to return to the base. One morning, a young man who was arriving for an interview looked Carlos up and down and asked disdainfully, "So, Uncle, is this doorman job worth it?" Carlos simply replied, "More than you can imagine, my son. This is where we learn to see who really comes in and who just passes through." And he stood there firm, like a door that has never stopped being open. A few weeks had passed since Carlos Montenegro started working as a doorman at the company. Everyone already knew who he was, but no one knew everything. Respect came naturally, yes, but there was also curiosity. How could someone who had so much power, who built empires and led entire teams, choose to work there, standing next to the front door? Carlos didn't talk much about his past. He was direct, polite, and observant. He never bragged. The few who tried to talk about his time as a director only heard stories about people, never about him. It was as if what he had done no longer mattered, but for the others it did. One Friday afternoon, a young man from the IT team named Vinicius decided to investigate further, not out of malice, out of admiration. He spent the weekend researching old files, scanned newspapers, corporate magazines from the 90s. He found what seemed impossible, an entire dossier on Carlos Montenegro's career. And the most surprising thing, he discovered that Carlos had not only worked on the founding of Nornet, he had been one of the 3 original founders. Vinicius didn't sleep well that night. He returned to work on Monday with a folder under his arm. He showed it to his closest colleagues. Soon, the rumor became the talk of the floor. Some employees were even embarrassed to remember how they treated him on his first day. Others, older, confirmed he was a giant, one of the best this country has ever had. He disappeared after he lost his wife. They said he went to live in the countryside and never showed up again. The owner of the company called Carlos to talk again, this time with a different request. We want to tell your story, not for marketing purposes, but because what you did, nobody here knew. Carlos took a deep breath. What I did belongs to the time I did it. It doesn't need to be remembered anymore. The owner insisted, it's not about the past. It's about the example you still set. Although reluctant, Carlos allowed them to prepare a small internal tribute. A meeting room was named after him. Next to the door, they placed a discreet frame with a black and white photo of him signing the founding of Nornet. The image that had previously been forgotten in digital files was now there, visible to everyone who came in with projects, spreadsheets, or ideas. On the morning of the small ceremony, Carlos was in the same place as always, at the door. The owner of the company gave a short, emotional speech, reminding everyone that great leaders don't need to shout, they just open doors. The phrase drew applause. But it was Carlos's speech that moved everyone. He went up to the small platform set up next to the reception. He slowly looked at the people surrounding him. I was called here today to talk about who I was, but what matters to me is who you are now. Many will remember me as a director, founder, leader. But the truth is that my greatest pride lies in this doorman's coat, because it is in this place that we see others in their entirety without titles or masks, standing with our eyes on the movement, and when we stop looking down, we start to see better. It wasn't a long speech, but no one could forget it. That week, something really changed in the company. The HR team created a program called Invisible Stories, aimed at valuing older professionals who were out of the market. Carlos' example became the basis for interviews, training sessions, and discussion groups, not as a symbol of pity, but as a symbol of forgotten power. Carlos, as always, was still at the door, now with more visitors than ever. Young people came to ask for advice. Old employees stopped by to have coffee with him during their breaks. Even those who left the company made a point of saying goodbye to him before leaving. One day, an executive from another company showed up at the reception. He had come from far away, heard the story, and wanted to see for himself. When he found Carlos, he extended his hand and said, "I need someone like you on my board." Carlos smiled. "Board? I already had mine. Now I prefer to see who comes in, really." And he went back to standing there, next to the door, observing, welcoming, silent, present, like a pillar that no one sees until the day it is gone. The company continued to grow. New contracts, new clients, new faces came in every day. But there was one thing that never changed. Carlos was there, standing next to the revolving door, with the same gray suit jacket, the same attentive eyes, and a restrained smile that listened more than spoke. To some, he was just the doorman. To others, he was a living legend. But to the most sensitive, Carlos was a kind of silent compass, someone who reminded them, just by his presence, that a person's value lies not in where they are, but in how they are. One morning, a teenager showed up at the building, head down. He was the son of an employee, left there while his mother finished a shift. Carlos noticed his sad look, the way he looked, as if he were carrying something too heavy for his age. He asked the boy to sit down for a while next to him on a bench, near the door. He didn't ask anything right away. He just offered silence and presence. After a few minutes, the boy began to talk. He talked about bullying at school, about his father's absence, about not feeling like he was enough anywhere. Carlos listened calmly. At the end, he said, "Do you know what a doorman's job is?" The boy shook his head. Carlos replied, "It's not just opening and closing doors. It's knowing when to expect someone, and when someone needs to be welcomed, not just let in." That boy left there with something different in his heart, and days later he asked his mother to bring Carlos a gift, a rubber bracelet with the phrase, "You saw me." That was all. But it said it all. Other moments like that became more frequent. People who used to just pass by started to stop. People who didn't even need to come in went there just to see him. Carlos never turned down conversation, but he didn't seek applause either. He said his job was to remind those who come in to look at those who open the way. HR started using his story as a case study on silent leadership. Some universities invited him to speak. He turned them all down. "Talking too much takes away the power of the gesture," he replied to one of the coordinators. The truth is that Carlos didn't want any more spotlight. He wanted purpose. And he had found it exactly where he least expected it, until, one late afternoon, something happened. Carlos didn't show up for his 5 p.m. shift. The security guard at the time found it strange. This had never happened before. No delay, no absence, nothing. Just silence. They tried to call, but Carlos's number had been out of service for weeks. He didn't use a cell phone. He never did. The next day, confirmation came from a mailman. A handwritten letter addressed to the company's board of directors. It was from Carlos. Inside, a simple note. "It's my time to leave, not because of sadness or illness, but because my door is now different. I thank everyone." I left an envelope at the reception with some documents. Oh, and leave the bank outside. It always had more stories than the entire building. With love, Carlos Montenegro. In the envelope, along with the note, were copies of Nornet's founding documents, old photos, and a folder with recommendations for a project. The second door program, an idea he designed to help companies hire professionals over 60, offering them not only work, but also a place, meaning, and presence. The news spread. The company declared a day of silence, not out of mourning, but out of respect. The employees all came down together that day and sat around the bench where Carlos sat. They told stories. They laughed. Some cried. The board of directors, touched by the gesture, decided to follow the project he left behind to the letter. The second door program became a reality, not only in that company, but in several others that heard about the case and wanted to replicate the idea. And what about the bench? It's still there. In the shade of a small tree, right next to the main door. With a discreet plaque made of aged wood that reads, "Here sat a man who opened more than doors." If you were one of those who passed Carlos Montenegro in that building, would you have stopped to listen? Or would you have walked right past, thinking he was just another person? Maybe. The answer says more about us than we imagine. If stories like this touch you in some way, maybe it's time to open another door too. Subscribe to the channel and keep reading stories that, like Carlos, have much more to say than it seems.